So at this time, we're going to focus on doing a little bit deeper study of Mary Shelley's work. We should be far enough into the novel that we can begin to work with some of the ideas maybe that Mary Shelley's playing with here. And so I want to start by looking at the idea that Mary Shelley was extremely well read. I mean, obviously her father was a publisher, a major name in the day. She would have writers, poets in and out of her house as a young girl. So reading was something that was huge in her life, and it's the fingerprints of many different texts are found throughout Frankenstein. But we're going to focus really on two in particular. And those two in particular are Rime of the Ancient Mariner by Samuel Taylor Coleridge and Paradise Lost by John Milton. Now, in a way, we've kind of covered Rime of the Ancient Mariner. We talked about how Captain Walton at the beginning of this story is much like the mariner. He's trapped in ice. He makes references in his letters to Margaret Saville, his sister, directly quoting from Rime of the Ancient Mariner. But for Mary Shelley, one of the more important parts of it was the mood and the feeling of Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And I think there's no better lines within the poem than the ones you see on the screen right now, which occurs toward the end of the poem. And it's all about the fear and what Mary Shelley is trying to create with that suspenseful, dreaded, anticipated encounter that Victor has and the creature maybe has as well as they chase each other in this second part of the book. So the short lines read, like one that on a lonesome road doth walk in fear and dread, and having once turned round walks on and turns no more his head, because he knows a frightful fiend doth close behind him tread. So, of course, we can't escape the fact that Coleridge himself was a frequent visitor to the Godwin house. That's Mary's father. So Mary Shelley, as a little girl, was able to hear Samuel Taylor Coleridge recite this poem aloud, and it left a deep, deep impression. So before he even published it, he was over at the household working through drafts, reading this, and a wide-eyed, very open Mary Shelley was taking it all in. And of course, as we all know, those influences at a young age will come back. And of course, Mary Shelley is a prolific reader. There's no doubt that Rime of the Ancient Mariner is all throughout it. The second work we're going to look at, that's what we're going to spend a little more time with through this week, and that is Paradise Lost by John Milton. So what I've got for you, if you would take a look, and I'm going to play this just a little bit, you're going to have a link in your Canvas account which provides a pretty good, it's a very short, maybe 4.5 minute summary of Paradise Lost, and then you'll be able to kind of work with that. So I'm gonna play that for you just briefly so you can kind of see and make sure you have the right one.
As a young poet, John Milton promised a great epic about the military feats of King Arthur.
So there you see, that's the video. And again, the link is in your Canvas account. We're not going to read the entirety of Paradise Lost. It is very dense and very, very difficult. But we're going to talk about the idea of Paradise Lost. And then we'll look at some specific elements in Paradise Lost, some quotations maybe, some lines, some situations that surface in Mary Shelley's telling of this story of Victor Frankenstein and his creature. This week, or for this section of our study of the book, we're going to be working through several different exercises of analysis. A lot of it will be centered around what we might call the religiosity of Mary Shelley, and whether or not her father and her husband, both very noted atheists, but certainly Mary Shelley was affected by the idea of God and the idea of man's relationship to that God. And so I think we're going to talk a little bit about that because we do see it happening within this story. So what you'll see is you'll have a handout, and there'll be several, I believe like 4 activities I want you to work on. And that's what we're going to focus on for this week. In a way, this will be kind of like a test for you or an exam for you. So the activities are a variety of things, but they'll help you understand maybe Mary Shelley's work a little deeper. Okay? So the first thing I want to do is I want to point you back to chapter 15 of the novel. So at this point in the story, the creature has been living outside the cottage of the DeLaceys, and he's become very comfortable watching them. He's become very comfortable helping them, but his education is now about to explode, and he finds himself walking through the woods, and he happens to find a suitcase, a valise, or something they call a portmanteau, and it is filled with some books, and 3 books in particular, and these books will make up the bulk of the creature's education. So what I want you to do for this task is read the passage, and you see it's not overly long, okay? I've just pulled it from chapter 15. It's not all of chapter 15. But this is where he talks about 3 books in particular and what effect each of the books had on him. So I want you to answer these 2 questions. So create a response. This can be on a document. You put all of these on the same document if you like. If you would like to do this freehand through like some kind of Venn diagram or chart or what have you, and then take a picture of that and upload that into Canvas, that's fine as well. But for this exercise, I want you to read the passage. I want you to identify the 3 works that were influencing him, and for each one, offer a brief summary of what the work is about. And then go directly into the text evidence. What does the creature say was the benefit? What did he learn from reading that book? What was the takeaway for him? And then your second task, and you'll notice the task I'm giving you will all be in a box-like format. Those are where the questions you are to answer. So it'll be up to you the format you choose. If you want to use a document, if you want to use some kind of slideshow, a combination of both, a freehand response is fine too. But this one is a little more involved. I've got several quotes from Paradise Lost, okay? And then I have a major quote from the first chapter of Genesis where God is creating man in his image. And what I want you to do, you see there's the quotes are here, okay? I want you to look at the quotes, and you're really going to do 3 things with them. And this could be done in a table or a chart of some sorts. I want you to identify what it is that the quotation is saying. So what's your best understanding of the message of the quote? What does it mean? Okay. And then the second thing would be, how does the quotation seem to fit one or more detail within the book? That detail might be a characterization of Victor, a characterization of the creature. Those are the 2 that you want to focus on, because that's really what Mary Shelley through Paradise Lost is working with 2 figures in Paradise Lost, the figure of Adam, okay, and the figure of Satan. And so when you watch the video that explains it, I think it'll do a good job of explaining how John Milton distinguishes between the 2. And then finally, the third response would be, do you think the creature is more like Adam or more like Satan? So given what you've learned about the creature so far, and what you've learned about Paradise Lost through these quotes and through the short video, who or what does he line up most with, the creature or Adam? Now, for the third task, we're going to take a look at the idea of sin. And I want you to start by thinking about your own understanding of what is a sin or a transgression. And I want to make the case that sin is not an event, okay? Because when a sin is committed, regardless of whether the person feels like they've done anything wrong, the community might look at that event. And to understand the extent of what we mean by to commit a sin, we have to understand that a sin happens at a particular point in time, and then moving forward, that sin must be dealt with in some way, either by the individual sinner or by the community that works around it and is witness to it. Now, until that sin is addressed, or that transgression or that wrongful deed is addressed, there's not going to be any growth or movement forward for either the individual or for the community. So let's look at 3 possibilities. That sin can be viewed as a burden that must be carried on the back, on the soul of the sinner. Another way is to look at it as sin is a debt. it needs to be paid, and it cannot be cleared until it is paid. These are two very different ideas. The sin as a burden is something that will be continual. So in Rime of the Ancient Mariner, the mariner who has to repeatedly through eternity find the person to tell and unburden his misery, his tale to, that would be the idea of sin as a burden. And the third idea is that sin is a stain. It marks the person. It physically creates a deformity within them or within their soul that must be removed or purified by some means, by some punishment. So as you begin to look closer at Frankenstein and look at Victor and also looking at the creature, see if you can make a decision about which of these three ideas, these three models seems to be at work. And it might be more than one, or it might be different for each of those two characters. The idea that you've got to pay a price for something, or that you've got to carry it along with you, or that you'll be forever marked like Cain was. Those are ideas that you, I think, definitely can see within Frankenstein and within Victor and within the creature. So we're going to kind of go back to St. Augustine, who was an ancient, early medieval scholar and theologian, and huge part of the Christian church. But he came up with three ideas of sinning. He said sin basically had three parts. You cannot sin by accident. Okay, sin is a willful choice. It begins with a temptation, some kind of introduction that you may or may not have any control over. So that first stage is temptation. That is followed by delectation, which basically means to debate. And so the apple is put in front of you, the temptation, the cookie, whatever it is. And in your appetite to achieve it, you think about it. Should I do this? Should I not? You may even weigh some of the consequences. If I do this, what's the benefit? What's the punishment? What's the result? So delectation is that part where your intellect becomes involved. The temptation is where your appetite becomes involved. And then the final stage would be resignation, where you make a choice to fall into the sin. So Augustine was very clear that sin is a knowledge-based action. So I'm going to discuss a little bit about two different models for sin, but thinking about all of that, okay, in addition to some of these law codes that we'll look at, given all that information, what I want you to do for this task is to evaluate the presence of sin in the story of Frankenstein. And I want you to look at both Victor and the creature and do an analysis, a study. This is probably going to be some kind of written response. It may include some bulleted items, but basically you want to look at both of these characters and how sin may be present for them, how they are handling it, and how it's working. So to think about that, I want you to look at two models for sin. Okay, our first model involves the ancient Greeks. They had three models for sin: hubris, pleonexia, and apotheosis. The definition of hubris would be excessive pride or self-confidence. And what the Greeks believed is, the ancient Greeks, these were three areas that if you stepped over the line with them, the gods were correct in punishing you. So hubris is too much pride. Pleonexia is the sin of excess. It's wanting more than you deserve. It's seeing something other people have and desiring it for yourself in excess. It's having too much food, too much fame, too much wealth. These are all things that the gods will smack you back for. And then the final sin is apotheosis. And the root of that is theos, which means God. So apotheosis is a sin of elevating yourself or someone to you and becoming a god, or seeing yourself or that person as a god. So this would be blasphemy, really, in some religious circles. And then the other item that might be more familiar to many of you is the Judeo-Christian concept of sin, which involves the Ten Commandments. So what you could do is take a look at these 10 and then the three Greek sins, and ask yourself which of these is Victor committing, which is the creature committing, and then what's the result of that? What occurs? What happens? And then the final task will be to look at the concept of a trinity. So threes in literature are very big, and they can serve to represent a lot of different things. We certainly have the Victor, we have the creature, and we have Captain Walton serving as this triad. But when you look at it, and I'll be going over these ideas, these trinities in a video after this one. But basically what you would be doing is I want you to, I've got 9 different trinities configured here. Learn 4 of them, and what I want you to do is create a Venn diagram. Venn diagram, if you remember, are those circles that are interconnected, okay, to show the relationships between adjoining items and among all 3. And what you're going to do is you're going to do a study of how you see the Trinity at work with the characters and the events in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So look for the next video at that. Now, we'll be working on this task all week long. So you may work with a partner if you like. That's perfectly acceptable. And look for the video on Trinities coming soon.